Hi, it is me, Roland. I am making a video. Occasionally, I like to chat to people I find very interesting. And we have been working together for a while now, and I find you extremely interesting. You are Gail Z. Martin, also known as Morgan Brice, the author of extremely successful and awesome paranormal romance books. I love everything that you do. You describe your Witchbane series of books as like the Winchester brothers if they weren't related and were together. I love that. So hi, Gail. How are you doing today?
Hi. Well, I'm doing fine, and thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I've really been enjoying working together, and it's made a huge impact. So thank you very much.
Oh, I am so pleased to hear that. It's funny that I always say it's much easier to make a positive impact with advertising when you have really successful books and really well written books. And the thing that I think is so interesting about you and why I wanted to interview you is because you just get it. You have this these series of books that you write, but you just really get what it is that ticks your readers' boxes. You just seem so sort of respectful and reverent to what it is you are doing. I really love
Thank you. Thank you. That's high praise. I appreciate that.
So first of all, describe yourself in your own words. Who is Gail / Morgan? What do you do?
Well, I write books. Let's see. I love history and dogs and spooky stuff, ghost stories of all kinds, stories about vampires and creatures and magic and all of that. I have 3 adult kids. I've been married for 34 years, coming this September, all to the same guy, and who is also my co-author. And so we work very closely together with the publishing business. So yeah, at heart, I'm a writer, which is what I decided I wanted to do from the time I was about 14. But I've always loved books. And so being part of making books and bringing stories to people, and that's just a lifelong dream come true.
So tell me about this. So when did you get into publishing? Because you started off traditionally published and then moved into self-publishing. Mm-hmm. But tell me about that journey. I mean, how old were you? What inspired it? Just where did it go from being a 14-year-old who wants to be a writer to actually having your books in print?
Well, it's one of those overnight success stories that was 20 years in the making. I started the first draft of the book that eventually became The Summoner, which is the first book in my Chronicles of the Necromancer series under my Gail name, when I was in college. I was the weirdo that had the electric typewriter back in the day and a map of a place that didn't exist pinned up on my dorm room wall. And when I had spare time, I was writing a book, which was a little weird at the time. And many drafts later, and 20 years and experience, it finally landed a publisher, and The Summoner came out in 2007. Now, over that journey, there are some place names and some character names and some character descriptions that remain. The story made a lot of big changes, which I would hope between age 19 and age 45. But it's one of those where never give up on your dreams, because if you hang in there long enough and just refuse to go away and stop knocking at the door, eventually things can happen.
Yeah, stubbornness does seem to be like one of the defining characteristics of successful writers. So tell me about that. So tell me about that book in particular, because I am most familiar with you through Morgan Brice, who writes the male paranormal romance. Tell me about this book in particular and what inspired it.
Okay, well, the Chronicles series, and these are what I jokingly call big fat fantasy. They're like 630 pages each. They're epic fantasy, so sword and sorcery, magic and kingdoms and kings and plots and Game of Thronesy sort of stuff. In fact, when I started out, I wanted to use my real name, which is Gail Z. Martin, but I thought about using initials just to make it more gender neutral. And my publisher told me I couldn't because George had already used all the initials. And since we were going to be next to each other on a shelf, you couldn't have George R.R. Martin and another Martin starting with G and more initials. And they said I just couldn't do that. So George sucked all the initials out of the room, and there were no more for anybody to use. Anyhow, It is about a young man whose family is murdered. He's prince. There's a coup. He's the only one of the royal family other than his half-brother who usurped the throne to get away. And as he and some friends are fleeing for their lives, he realizes that he has a very rare magical ability to intercede between the living and the dead. And he needs to learn to control his magic before it destroys him in order to avenge his family and save his kingdom. And so that story plays out over 6 books, which are all equally big fat fantasy. And I'll be coming back to that world actually next year with a sequel series, The Legacy of the Necromancer. And it's just a series that I really love. I started writing Tris, my main character, when I was 19, like he is. And I was a lot older by the time it got into print. But he's always got a special place in my heart by being the first one. And because the series is sword and sorcery and epic fantasy, there's a whole lot of world building that goes into that. Each of my epic fantasy series has a completely different magical system and a completely different religious system. And I have 4 epic fantasy series right now, but the Chronicle series is the first of those. And then also as Gail, I have urban fantasy. With my husband, I co-write steampunk and near future post-apocalyptic fiction, and a 1920s, roaring 20s monster hunter, and a snarky monster hunter in the wilds of Pennsylvania. And then also as Gail, I've got a ex-priest and a demon hunter hunting demons in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So that's all the stuff on the Gail side. And then Morgan, as you said, has 5 different series of urban fantasy, male paranormal romance.
And you've written all of these since 2007, pretty much.
Yep.
That's so how do you do it? How are you so prolific?
Well, I mean, this is what my husband and I do for a living. So it isn't like I have to squeeze it around a day job, which is a big advantage. And I did that for a long time. And that's why it took me 20 years to get the first book out. So I completely respect that and I understand that. And nobody should measure their own productivity by anybody else's. It's my job. That's what I do every day. And I've got an idea of which books I want to bring out in a year. And I try to bring a new book out in every series every year, every current series. Some series have wrapped up on the Gail side. Sometimes things get in the way. You know, last year was slower than usual because the world was on fire and it was kind of hard to concentrate. So I was, the words came harder last year. I think they came harder for everybody. And I was very fortunate that they came at all because I had a lot of writer friends who just couldn't cut through all of the stress to write. So I was very fortunate that I got anything last year. And now I'm kind of playing catch up and trying to keep all the series current because I know as a reader, I hate to wait for the next installment in a series when I love a series and I love the characters. So I try really hard not to do that to my readers.
And you have really loyal readers. And the interesting thing is, you say there's quite a lot of crossover with your readers.
Mm-hmm. There is, more than I expected. When the whole thing with the Morgan Brice name is because in the Gail and Larry books, there are relationships, but there's no on-page sex. There's nothing explicit. And some of those relationships are male-female, some of them are male-male, but there's no on-page sex. And so when I wanted to do the Morgan Brice book, having sex in the book itself was very, it was just going to be part of what was happening. And I didn't want anybody to accidentally pick up one of the books and have a heart attack because they got more than they bargained for. So Morgan Brice is not a secret. Unlike some people, I don't have to hide who I am to not lose my job or something. It really is a branding thing that says, if you pick up a Morgan Brice book, it is going to be 50-50 romance and urban fantasy, and there will be explicit sex. It's really just kind of a branding thing.
And
I was surprised because I went to my Gail readers and I said, so I did a thing. That's sort of standard with me. So I did a thing, and I'm now writing these books, and I don't know if you're interested at all, but if you are, come on over and look. And a bunch of them followed me. And then as I started to gain readers as Morgan Brice, I said, well, I do this other thing under this other name. And I started to weave the characters into each other's books. I said, if you want to check out this stuff, doesn't have any romance, doesn't have much romance in it, but, it's good adventure. To go, oh, we read that too. And they went over and checked out my Gail stuff. And all of the modern stories, as Gail and Morgan cross over, the characters know each other, they show up in each other's books, they ask each other for help. And that has just been terrific to help weave the worlds together, not only for me, but for the readers. So it seems like it is one big, very real world. And Marvel may have its cinematic universe, but my readers tease me about having the Martin cinematic universe.
I love that, though. I mean, there are so many authors. When I started reading books, I used to read my mother's chick lit and stuff, and I loved how you would have like a universe, and it would focus maybe on one character in one book, but that character would appear in another book. And you're right, it creates like a cinematic universe before cinematic universes were even a thing.
I love it because, well, for one thing, there's no way I could keep that many separate worlds straight. I keep the epic fantasy stuff is pretty separate. Although there is one series, the newest one, Assassins of Landria, that will eventually get some Morgan Brice crossovers. But the others are kind of in their own separate little universes. But it makes it so much easier for me if everybody uses the same kind of magic, lives in the same sort of world, and they know each other. Why wouldn't they? Hunting monsters and shutting down bad magic, you've got to be a small group of people. So they're going to run into each other. And I love having found family and loyal friends and people backing each other up.
I kind of like that. I often feel that when you write a series of books with sort of these big casts and things, it's almost like having a virtual family, and you can sort of fill in the gaps that you might not have in real life. And I think that's why it appeals to a lot of readers.
Well, it does. And, you have nothing to say over the people that you are born into as a family. And some people hit the jackpot and some people don't. But for people who don't, for whatever reason, then you really have to go out and make your family of choice, if not your family of blood. And those are the friends that you bring around you. And that can last a lifetime. And it's every bit as strong and legitimate, often sometimes stronger than bonds by blood. And so I love to bring that in with friends that really are diehard friends, and they're gonna have your back.
So in your Morgan Brice books, especially, they're basically like gay romance books. The thing that you and I found out, which I found so interesting, because this is a thorny topic, is a lot of people complain about gay romance books on Amazon because they say they're written by women, targeted towards women. But your books quite uniquely have a large male audience. Your books, in the Also Bought section, there are a large number of books by male authors of gay romance, which I find really interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I don't know for sure. I'm thrilled that that's the case. I guess there are kind of two parts to the answer. I'll answer the why first. All I can guess is I try to be accurate, and I have a lot of gay male beta readers who are in various life stages. And so they are my touchstone and bellwether on whether I am accurately representing people in the community and relationships. And so if they give me the thumbs up that from their experience with themselves and their friends, I'm writing something that is respectful and accurate, then I feel comfortable putting that out into the world, that I'm not misrepresenting the community that I'm writing about. So that may be the why. And I mean, for anything, good research. The bigger question that sometimes comes up with this is writing something that you're not. And it would be a very boring world in writing if we all only wrote who we were. I mean, I've never been a king or a warrior or gone to battle or been in the military or honestly done much of anything interesting. There was this one time I went parachuting in college, but that's not going to make a series of books. And other than that, me personally, I'm kind of boring, but that's where imagination and research comes in. And as long as you are doing the work to get it right and you're not misrepresenting and you're not perpetuating negative stereotypes and you're not, and you are 100% backing and allied with who you're writing about, then I think you can write good, accurate stories. And so I am thrilled that that other piece of demographics seems to bear out, that people are saying, I don't really care who wrote this. This sounds like me, and I like the stories. And to me, that's a very high compliment.
I love that. And sorry, a little window popped up there. One of the things that I found really interesting, I was talking to somebody recently about traditional publishing versus self-publishing, and so many things, and especially like books about the LGBTQ or people who fall under that umbrella. They kind of got almost excluded by traditional publishing because, you know, it wasn't marketable. And I think one of the most amazing things about self-publishing is finally people who have relationships like that can see their own relationships reflected in fiction. And I mean, as somebody who started off in the world of traditional publishing, then moved into self-publishing, like, what are your thoughts about that? What's your experience been? Why did you make the switch?
Wow. Okay. Hold on to that thought, because there are like 3 questions there. I want to hit all of them. I'll take the one on LGBTQ representation first. You know, people often complain about, as for as much as we love some of the big movie franchises, sometimes it's also like, really, we're getting another reboot? This is now Terminator 65. You know, it seems sometimes like the movies always want to play it safe, and rather than coming out with something new and really original from all the source material that's out there, you know, books and manga and web comics and comic books and all that, they go, let's do this again, only a little different. And they're playing it safe because there's money on the line. Well, traditional publishing, New York and London, do the same thing. And it's like, well, we could take this real flyer on this thing that's really interesting, or we could do more of the same. And so that happens a lot. And I think that the powers that be were not in touch enough with the market to understand that there was a market for gay romance, and that the market for gay romance extended beyond just the LGBTQ community. And so I think it took having the ability for indie publishers to do what we do to prove the viability of that market, at which point the big guys go, oh, look, there's this thing. We could make money at it. These people have been the guinea pigs. Let's us jump into it. So, you know, the good thing is you may get more books. The bad thing is, you know, they made all the indie publishers go out there and take the risk. Why did I jump from traditional, to indie? Well, I started out, the first several series were with traditional publishers in New York and London. My first publisher was Solaris Books, which is based in Oxford, England. And I did the first several books of the Chronicles of the Necromancer with them, and several other books as well. And then they were sold, and I was dragging on. There was another publisher that jumped in and said, hey, well, we don't know when that's going to resolve, but we'd like you. So I jumped over to Orbit, which is also New York and London, and did a series with them. And traditional publishing is going through a lot of transition right now. They have, there's a lot of turmoil. They're kind of trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. It's a great 19th century business model. And it just became time for me to walk away because it was not, I mean, your mileage may vary, it works differently for different people. I did not feel like I was really getting the chance to write the stories I wanted to write in the way I wanted to write them. And there was too much bureaucracy in the way. And fortunately, with Larry and I working together, we're able to, he does all the back stuff as well as contributing in the brainstorming and the writing. But he is terrific with the formatting and the tracking royalties and all that good stuff. And we've gathered a found family of cover artists and editors, many of whom also had a track record in traditional publishing. And so we just kept on going, and now we can write as quickly as we want in as many ways as we want. And it's only the readers that can say, hey, you know, okay, I'm not thrilled about that. So far, we haven't hit that. So it's been great to say, let's throw this against the wall and see if it sticks. Hey, look, it stuck pretty well. Let's do more of that. It's been fun.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I noticed is, the old traditional publishers, because they had such a big bureaucracy. I was down in the Wiley headquarters in Hoboken recently, and they've got this huge skyscraper and stuff, and it's like they have 100 authors and they're aiming to sell 1 million copies of each of their books, whereas in self-publishing you have 10,000 authors who maybe sell 1,000 copies of their books. But the difference is, for an individual author, selling 1,000 copies of your book is an income that you can live off, whereas for a publisher, that's bankruptcy.
Right. I mean, but part of that, honestly, is because of the way they do their business model. If you're going to print in advance and warehouse and ship and let bookstores send back anything anytime for a full refund, you're going to have some business problems. Where indie authors, you're right, we don't have to sell as many copies of a book to make a good profit off of it, because we don't have the overhead, and because without the middleman, we get to keep more of the money from each book. I think traditional publishing has become a lot like gambling on horse races. In the early days, they used to find reliable authors who could be counted on to write a couple of books a year that gained an audience, and that audience would be loyal to that author, and they knew they were going to sell X number of books if that author brought out a new release. And then they kind of got into, let's take a huge flying bet on somebody who has never done anything before and see if they will be a breakout hit. And we're either going to win big or it's all going to fall apart. And I think that there's an appeal of that gambling to some people. And so most of the mid-list authors have gradually either been pushed out the door or left on their own because they weren't getting the resources. And many of us are thriving just fine as indie. But there's a mindset there in the higher levels of traditional publishing that is go big or go home. And if you look at consumer products, which is, I was in marketing for 17 years, there's a reason why Procter & Gamble and some of those companies still market, all kinds of necessities to people, because otherwise people forget about them and they go off and buy another brand. And it's the same way with books. You can do just fine with a reliable crowd of mid-listers if you're managing your business in a way that is actually using tried and true products, in this case books. And that's not the business model traditional publishing is interested in.
No, it always seems lunacy to me. It's like they have every advantage available to them and they've completely squandered it.
Well, and what they've never really realized or don't want to think about is that one of the huge things they potentially bring to the table is the whole marketing piece. Because that's something that indie authors have to do, and we have to do it on top of writing a book and managing the tax stuff and all of that. And their size and scale and scope could do that marketing and create the demand that all consumer product companies create. But that isn't sexy to them, and that isn't where they've wanted to put their focus, which is a shame, because I think they could make a big difference if they focused on marketing much more than they do.
I find that very interesting. And your marketing clearly gave you an advantage, your marketing background.
That was one of the reasons I did it. I was a history major undergrad because I knew I wanted to write epic fantasy, and that's usually set in a quasi-medieval background. None of my epics are set in actual Earth history, but it's roughly equivalent to maybe the mid-1500s in Western Europe. And I knew that I wanted to be an author, and I wanted to give those books the best shot. So, and I also wanted to be able to afford typing paper. So I got an MBA in marketing because that's mostly writing fiction anyhow. And I learned how to get things in front of people to say, hey, you might really like this. Do you want to give it a try? And so that's the mindset that I bring with the books is, hey, you might really like this. If you haven't tried me yet, why not give it a shot? And you might find a whole new series that you love. And that's that has helped a lot, because I think a lot of authors are introverts, and a lot of authors feel weird about marketing their books. You know, your mom always said, don't blow your own horn. Well, mom was kind of wrong on that, because if you don't, who will? And handing somebody a book and saying, hey, you might like this, that's pretty soft sell. It's not like you're chasing someone down the street, waving it at them, going, buy my book, and that doesn't work. But asking someone what they like to read, and then if you write a variety of things, saying, well, you know, I write something that's a lot like that, and here, take a look, and let them read the back cover. And if they like it, they'll like it, and if they don't, well, hey, no harm done.
I think one of the reasons we work so well together is my background is advertising. But the golden rule of advertising is it doesn't matter how much money you throw at advertising. If people don't want to buy it, they're not going to buy it. So you know how to make people want to buy your stuff, and I can get sets of eyes on it, and then that's moving completely tracks. Okay, you go on about your husband all the time, who does all the stuff. Who does all the stuff in the back end, and then you realise how dodgy that sounds. It's a collection of words put together. So tell me about your journey as a writer with him. How did he get involved? My wife won't read any of my books. She has zero interest in anything I do, but he seems like he's right there holding your hand through the whole thing.
He has been. You know, we actually met in college, although we didn't get together until about 7 years later. And from the get-go, he knew that I had this imaginary character in my mind, Tris, who was just along for the ride. And he had read the early manuscript way back when. And he's always been very encouraging about, you know, you can do this. You can get published. This will work out sooner or later. And so that's been a wonderful thing all the way through the years when, you know, I'd work on the manuscript and then I'd get busy at work, or we'd have kids, or we'd move, and the manuscript would go in a drawer for months or years, and then I'd pull it back out and I'd do another revision. And he was always very, very supportive and encouraging, and I couldn't have done it without him. And he is also, not only do we brainstorm books together, and he is a very good writer on his own. When I say we co-write, you know, I'll take a running leaf at the first draft, and then I'll send it to him, and then he'll go through and he may rewrite parts of it, or suggest, hey, you know, I think it would be better if we did this, or tighten for clarity, or go, okay, I know this is clear in your head, but nobody's going to know what you're talking about, which is wonderful. And so going back and forth between that, we get the book in pretty good shape before we send it off to the editor and the beta readers. And it's because after all this time, I can't tell where he's written something in, or where he's fixed a section, or where he's added stuff. Our writing voice like that is enough similar that it's seamless to me. And nobody's ever been able to say, hey, I think in, you know, page 24, I don't think I think that was Larry. No, I mean, it really blends. And we've just been very lucky to be able to pull off working relationship. And we've been working together full time for over 10 years now.
So tell me about...
And nobody's... so it's good.
So tell me about that, because this is now a business that you run. And you said sort of 10 years ago you started it as a business. Mm-hmm. How did that go? What was the decision to sort of... all our lives, writers get told, you know, be sensible, be realistic, manage your expectations. So what is it that inspired you or gave the opportunity to just be like, we're going all in and doing this full time? Well, we had both. I've been in corporate for 17 years, and I left. There was downsizing at the last large corporation I was at, and I looked around and I did a lot of interviewing, and I didn't find anything that was different or exciting. And I started to get freelance clients and consulting clients, and said, hey, you know, maybe it's time I do this as a freelance business, and that way I can get the book written. And that's how I finally got the time and the focus to get the Summoner out. Well, Larry was doing well in corporate, but, you know, there were still mergers and acquisitions and businesses, you know, it's a new name every you know, couple of months. And the time finally came when there was another big merger, and he kind of looked at it and said, you know, I'm done with this. And so at that point, you know,
like you said, you're brought up to say, don't bet the farm on your writing, don't quit your day jobs, running joke. But you also get to a point in life where you say, well, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And it's never really going to be safe. And my gosh, how many times have I lost that day job because of things that weren't in my control? Let's take a flying leap and see what happens. And we were very fortunate that it worked, but we make a really good team. And he just brings a lot of really great things to the partnership. And you know, it's one of those where if things had kept going swimmingly, we probably would have done the quote unquote grown up responsible thing and stayed with it. But that really would have lost out, because even though it was scary, it was the right decision to make the leap. And there's never going to be a perfect time.
No, and I think you nailed it when you said, you know, there are always constant mergers, constant acquisitions. Yeah. I remember working at the same desk for 2 years and having worked for 4 different radio stations during that time. And, you know, you know, companies are quite happy to let you go. So the loyalty thing is there. I will say the thing that I'm really impressed with is when you strike out and become a writer full-time on your own, you become your own boss and you have to be very, very disciplined about things. How did you manage that?
I like to write. I mean, I enjoy the writing. Back before I was writing and published, writing was what I did on my vacations. Writing was what I would get up at an ungodly hour on Saturday morning when the kids were little to be able to write for a couple hours before the rest of the house was awake. So I enjoy telling stories. I enjoy sharing those stories with people. And what I really enjoy is when people come back and say, hey, you know, I've really been going through a hard time, but I read your story and it helped. I mean, that's the best thing in the whole world, is to find out that getting a reprieve from reality and escaping into one of my stories has helped someone out in a bad place, because books have always done that for me when I'm, you know, going through something. So just putting butt in chair to put words on paper is usually not the hard part. There's all the other things that go with the writing that isn't writing, that takes up time. And that is, some of that is the marketing, the being present on social media, the doing all the behind the scenes things that help raise the visibility of the book, but that readers never see. And that's all that kind of stuff that you and I've been working on with how do you do the keywords and the categories and all the invisible stuff to readers. But it makes a difference on whether or not you ever even notice that book as an option to decide to click and buy. That takes a lot of time. And when it's your own company, you know, we split up a lot of things, but there are only 2 people doing this. And so you've got to fit it all in. And then, you know, at some point you have to get groceries and do some of the real people stuff, as I think of it, which is, pardon me, pay the bills and, you know, fix things around the house. So then you still only get 24 hours and you got to sleep sometimes. So I think that's the biggest challenge. Pardon me.
Well, another challenge. So in Morgan Brice, you've got 5 series going, and you try and put out a book every year for each series. So how do you manage that? Do you have like 5 books on the go at once? Do you write one book and then one book, then one book? And how does your day, like if you want to put words on a page, how does that, when do you get up and write immediately? Do you write at lunchtime? What's your system and your schedule for all of that?
Well, I have a list of books that I want to bring out each year. And ideally, it would be a new one in all of the current series for both Gail and the Morgan sides, which is about 13 series. On a really good year, I can make that happen. Sometimes I'm a few books behind. And then there are other things like I get opportunities to be in maybe an anthology, and it's working with a good group of people, so I say yes. Or maybe there's a special promotion that requires an original story or a novella. And again, it's a good group of people. I want to work with them. I want to be supportive. We have a good match for audiences. So there's a lot of potential discoverability. In other words, my readers are likely to like them and their readers are likely to like me. So, hey, if we do something together, any readers who haven't discovered the other one are likely to discover, hey, that's a great opportunity, but it's more writing. So I'm not a morning person. It takes me a lot of coffee to get hungry. So I tend to do left brain stuff in the morning. And for me, that is checking the ads, doing the emails, doing videos, doing anything that isn't putting words on page gets done in the morning, because that's a time I can handle that. And then after lunch, I sit down, and that's when I start either reading manuscript to edit or writing new stuff. And that can go on till, midnight. Interrupted by, oh, gee, I should cook dinner. And then it's a certain point I just say, okay, I'm brain is fried, I'm done, I'm going to read for fun now or watch some TV or something. But that's pretty much the day. We've worked from home for 10 years, so current situation is not really a change on that. It's just us and the dogs most of the time. So really, the writer brain kicks in at its best around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and then, goes from there. And I shoot for about 10 pages. It's great if I can get more than that, but that's sort of what I budget. And so when I look at, there are 30 days in a month, 10 pages a day, I might be able to get 300 pages. That's a, book and a half, maybe a book and a quarter. As far as how many are going at one time, that varies. Right now, I've got 4 kind of going. One is with the editor and the beta readers. One will shortly be going to the editor and the beta readers. One is edited and beta read, and it'll be coming out soon. And then one is still in process. And I'm working on a short story. So I kind of jump back and forth among those, and that kind of keeps it fresh for me, because I don't get tired of one world or one group of people.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because there are some people, I try and always stick to one book and finish it, but sometimes you can really hit a brick wall, and it's difficult. Like the last book that I wrote, I'd pretty much written it already, and then it took 6 months to edit it, just because I was stuck in there, and it was very, very left brain trying to sort it all out. The other thing I love about your books is the fact that they are so vividly written in real world places and involving so many real world situations. Like we were talking about the that amazing tunnel in Charleston that collapsed, and there was the vampire. I don't know, tell me a little bit about that, but I just love the way you delve so richly into like real life myth and lore and things. So where did that come from? You started off writing in fantasy, and now you're like writing urban and contemporary and paranormal fantasy, but it has its roots in reality.
Well, even with the epic fantasy, I always looked first to history and mythology, because the stories that we tell as human beings are remarkably similar across the ages and across time and place. If you really look at the stories and the legends and the myths, they are more similar than different, whether you're talking about what happens in Europe or Asia or Africa or Latin America. You can lay the myths out against each other and go, look, they have all these common elements. Look, the same kind of character shows up in these. Hey, that's the same monster we saw over there. And that's what I like to tap into, is that commonality of what scares us, of the kind of adventures we like to read, the kind of heroes we like to cheer for. And if it happened in history, it could happen again. And so that's where I really loved having the history and folklore background, because I think it grounds it in stories that when you read them, you have a sense of reality, because elements are familiar. You've read this before, and that makes it more true in your mind, even if we're talking about ghosts and vampires. And so I brought that to the epic fantasy. In a lot of ways, writing the contemporary urban fantasy is easier in that I don't have to build the whole world. I can set it in a city that exists, and I try to always pick places that I'm very familiar with, either because I've lived there or I visited it a lot or vacationed there for years, or at least spent time there. so that I can get the vibe of the city, because cities have a personality. I mean, New York is not New Orleans. And if you aren't aware of that vibe, you're going to write it wrong. And if you are aware of it, people who are familiar with the place are going to go, oh, she gets it. She's been there. Otherwise, it's going to jangle them and throw them out of the story. So I try very hard to make the location as much of a character as any of the people. And that means, you know, if I'm going to start a book in a new location, I start with what the ghost stories are. I want to know where the haunted places are. I want to know what are the big scandals that ever happened in that town, especially back in the day, the ones people are still talking about. And what were the big tragedies? Because usually you get ghosts from that, and scandals. And that's a great start. And you look at the history of a place, and you look at who won and who lost, and who might have a grudge. And those are all things you can build from. And so I try to bring that into the plot building for the stories. And when characters are from a certain place, that's also going to inform how they look at the world. And that may mean that there are some things in the way they look at the world they need to get over and learn something new. But it also means they're going to come at problem solving from a particular perspective. And that's part of what makes a character feel real, because as human beings, we're all like that.
Well, I would say one of the other strengths that you have is your characters are very, very vividly real, even when they sound like they're not. Like you were talking to me about Gruff and how there's a character who's a goat shifter, and it's the fainting goat, and it's just... It just works so well the way you're describing it. I can't wait to read Gruff. And I love in Witchbane, you've got the big tough monster hunter, and you've got the guy who's like not a big tough monster hunter, but they work so well together. Where do you come up with your characters?
I mean, I know what I like to read as a reader, and the kinds of friends, companions, characters, archetypes, and romantic pairings that I like to read about. So the books that I write are first and foremost books I want to read myself. And so I kind of have to write them if I want to read them. And that's a lot of what I bring to the page is, hey, I've really enjoyed reading these types of books. Here's more of that. And if you liked it, if you like those other things, you might like this too, because all stories are based on other stories. You know, you hear a legend, or you see a TV show, or you read something, or you watch the news and you say, ooh, you know, they did it this way, but what if it had been done that way? Or, you know, I like the basic idea, but I didn't like what they did with it. What if it went off in a whole different direction? And that's how writing and the creation of stories has always worked. Stories are built on other stories, and everybody takes it a little further, or gives their own spin to it, or modernizes it, or takes it in a different direction. But no story is completely out of whole cloth. All stories are built on other stories, and so that's kind of how I come at it. Is what do I like to read? And what would I like to see more of? And so that's what I try to put out into the world.
But the characters themselves are so vivid and believable and real, and the relationships they have are so interesting. Where do you get like the material for that?
I think writers tend to be people watchers. You know, when I used to travel and have to go eat in a restaurant by myself, one of the little games I used to play was I would look at some of the other diners and make up stories about them in my head, you know, just to amuse myself. Like, gee, I wonder what she does for a living, and is she happily married? Is she divorced? Is she, you know, does she have kids? You know, and then I start making up these stories for absolutely no use except I'm bored. But I think you watch people, and you know people, and you are people. And if you've been in relationships, you kind of know how that works for good and bad. And you try to bring all that fodder to the table. You know, it's a running joke about be nice to me, I'm a writer, or I'll put you in my book. And you know, of course, don't actually with real people per se, but there's certainly historical characters that I've taken some liberties with and written into the books. And everything you learn about human nature comes into building characters. So when you need to find characters to go on a quest together, whether that's modern or epic, hey, let's work together to solve a problem is a quest. What skills do you need? And what would people be like if they had those skills? And not if you take their skills to the breaking point, how is that skill also a weakness? Like if you've got really, really good focus, maybe that helps you stay on track, but maybe that doesn't make you the best at listening to other people, or maybe that means you're up in your head too much and you miss out on other things. So you kind of have to think through, what are their good points? What are their flaws? How do they work together, and how are they better together? And how do people feel? And I try really hard to pay attention to that. And I hope that comes across on the page.
I really think it does. I think that's another one of the things that's really strong about your books. You mentioned traveling. One of the other things that I think is amazing is you are face to face with your fans. You go to conventions and things like that. So tell me, when did you start doing that? And obviously we haven't been able to do that in the last year or so, but tell me about that as an experience, because so many writers are completely insular and never do anything like that, and you're actually out there face to face with people.
Well, I was a fan before I was a writer, and now that's true of an awful lot of writers, but I went to conventions back in high school a long, long time ago, when that was still kind of weird. We sort of won the geek war with all the Marvel movies and in the last number of years, it has become more cool to be a geek. I was a geek before it was cool. And people would look at you and going, "You're doing what this week? You're going to a Star Trek convention." Ooh. But I found other people who liked the same things I did, and who had watched the same shows and seen the same movies and read the same books. And so you could have your little in-jokes with them, and they got the jokes. And that's wonderfully affirming. That's a type of found family that is just very, very special. And, before the internet, it was really hard to find people who liked the same thing, unless you just lucked into it. Now it's much more easy to find those communities, even if they aren't personally in your little town. But boy, back in the day, it really was conventions where you could find people who liked the same thing, and it was a marvelous thing. And I went through a period, when we were moving and raising kids, where I didn't really get to do the convention thing very much, but I knew I wanted to go back to it once books started coming out, because that is kind of a heartbeat of fandom. Now, you can certainly be a fan and never go to conventions, but the people who do go to conventions and who save up all their vacation time to go to conventions, these folks are really invested in the fandom and in the geekdom and in the things they love. And so they want to go be with other people who love the same thing, and listen to people talk about aspects of whatever the fandom is, and meet the people who create the fandom, whether that's the authors or the celebrities, the actors, or the people behind the scenes. They just really want to be immersed in it. And I've made wonderful, wonderful friends with other authors and with readers, because in a normal year, I was doing somewhere between 12 and 15 conventions a year. I tried to keep it to one a month, because, you also have to write the books, and it takes time and it's expensive. But, and most writers go on their own dime. They aren't paid for they don't have their expenses covered. So you have to mind business. But I love getting to talk to readers, and I love asking readers, well, what do you like to read? Why do you like to read that? What else do you like to read? And I think that's a way to keep an eye on keep the feel of the pulse of what real people in the genre are reading. And the people who come to conventions are your hardcore fans of the genre. They're not just casual. They're not just, well, I picked this book up because it had a nice cover. They'll read 100 to 200 books in that genre. And so they're the experts. And so if you ask them, well, what do you like? What don't you like? There's nobody better to tell you that. And then you use that to inform your own storytelling from there on out.
That's okay. So moving on to writing itself, are you a plotter or a pantster? Is it pantster or I can never remember.
Answer, yeah.
Pantser, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm more of a plotzer.
Plotter.
I do outlines, and I couldn't write as quickly as I do without outlines because I can't afford to meander down a dark alley and have to just delete chapters. I need to be going in the right general direction. Now, sometimes, even with an outline, you think you're going in the right direction, and you get down the street and the bridge is out, and you go, okay, well, I'm going to have to come at this from another angle because that didn't work. And you don't know that until you're down in the weeds. But an outline definitely keeps you from meandering off in too many different directions, and it kind of lets you work in, well, which characters do I need, and what is the bad guy going to do, and gee, how do I avoid having people just talk to each other for 3 chapters? There needs to be some more action here. You see more of that on you pull the camera out, so to speak, and see that from a bigger perspective when you outline. But when you actually are trying to write from the outline, that's when the magic happens, because that's when the stuff that you didn't expect shows up. That's when the character says something that you didn't anticipate, but it's absolutely right. And those are the moments that you write those lines that you pat yourself on the back a little bit for and go, oh, wait, that was actually good. And that's magic. That happens in the spur of the moment as you're writing.
So what if somebody is watching this video for the first time and they want to experience the magic of Gail / Morgan? What book would you recommend they start with?
Well, if you're reading Morgan, kind of depends on how much fantasy you like with your romance. The Witchbane series is very much urban fantasy with romance, and if you like things like Supernatural and Buffy and X-Files, that's going to be your jam. If those are a little too scary for you, then you probably like Badlands, that has a psychic and a skeptical homicide cop, and they're still solving supernatural mysteries, but it isn't as super urban fantasy, or maybe a little bit as dark as Witchbane. And there are other series as well, but those are good starters on the Morgan side. On the Gail side, if you like epic fantasy and you have time to read a big book, I'd send you over to The Summoner and the Chronicles of the Necromancer. If you like epic fantasy and you don't have time to read a big book, that's where my Assassins of Landria series comes in, because it is shorter and funnier, and it has all the epic feels without the epic length. So instead of being 600 pages, it's about 200 pages, but you're still going to feel like you went on an epic adventure. If you like urban fantasy, I'd send you to Deadly Curiosities, which is my antique and curio shop in Charleston, South Carolina, where the proprietor can read the history of magic and magic of objects by touching them. And she and her friends save the world from supernatural threats. So it kind of all depends on what you like to read.
And I love how Deadly Curiosities has that wonderful relationship between the owner and the vampire, which is so interesting because there's no like romance between them, but it's still almost a book based around relationships rather than necessarily plot, which I just think works so well. That seems to be like the thing that you do that really makes your book stand out, is just you manage to create relationships that are so vivid and believable. Well,
that's one of the things I love about bringing characters back book after book, is they can deepen those relationships, and it goes from being a walk-on cart to being somebody that the reader has gotten to know, even if it's a secondary character and not the main character. It becomes real.
So I'm going to start wrapping this up because, but I wanted to ask you, if there are people watching this who want to follow the same route as you and become a writer, what are some of the pieces of advice that you've heard or things you've learnt yourself that you think have given you an advantage?
Well, I think, you start with the stubbornness piece, because it always takes longer than you think it will. And so don't let the setback stop you. If you really want this, then you got to go for it, and you don't ever quit, even when it looks like you're running into a brick wall, because brick walls fall down, or you can find your way around them. I think the other thing is learn the business, and there are so many places out there where you can learn how publishing works, so that you aren't reinventing the wheel or making preventable mistakes. Now, I haven't kept track of whether they are still out there. I read pretty much everything that Writer's Digest books published at the time. There may be other sources for that now. But that taught me how to write a query letter, what agents did, how the publishing process worked, and at that point it was traditional publishing, how to format a manuscript, how to write characters, how to write dialogue. I did a self-study of that as I was writing, which was really invaluable. And if those books don't exist anymore, there are other sources out there. Just always look at the track record of who's offering them. If it's somebody that says they know all about writing, but actually hasn't written anything, they might not be your best source. If there's somebody who has a track record of books out there that are selling, they might know more about what they're talking about. And you're going to have to make a decision. It doesn't have to be an exclusive decision on whether you want to work with a publisher or whether you want to bring books out yourself. There are pros and cons to both ways. I think you learn a lot, good and bad, working with a publisher that stands you in good stead going indie. But I have a lot of friends who were indie from the start and have done just fine and are making a good living at it. So you have to figure out what's good for you, and then you just have to be stubborn about it and stick with it.
I think that's great advice, and I think that's, yeah, I think that really is what makes or breaks it, just that stubbornness. So, yeah, everyone always saying stop being so stubborn, but that's the only way to get ahead. Finally, I keep joking about this every time we have a chat, but I think it will happen one day, that Netflix or Amazon Prime or something is going to pick up Witchbane or Badlands or something as a series. So let's talk casting. Who's gonna play the roles?
Oh, that's honestly where I'm never really good at that because that's hard for me. But so for Deadly Curiosities, we had to do this to pick cover models. And I would have said a younger Ryan Gosling for Soren, maybe from like his Notebook days. A younger Nicole Kidman who's blonde for Cassidy. And a younger Keanu Reeves, maybe for T.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. And since the characters in the book are in their mid-20s, mid-late 20s, that kind of gives you an idea of the age bracket there. Triss, my main character in the Chronicles of the Necromancer, has... I don't know if you're familiar with the band The Moody Blues, but I was a huge fan back in the day, and their lead singer, Justin Hayward, has always been my mental image for Triss Drake. And the bad guy, his half-brother, Jared, has always been Jim Morrison in my mind, the Lizard King. So, those are probably some of the ones that I've done the most vivid casting for. Most of the time when I'm picking cover models for the covers, I go through Shutterstock, and it's like, okay, I have a general idea, age, physical description, and I have done so many covers now with so many of the models, stock photo models that I go through now, and I sort of have names for them all because they're my characters. It's like, no, I can't use him for this series. He'd be cheating. He's in that other character, that other series. So I have this weird relationship where I name all the models because I've used them for characters.
I mean, it's funny. I have a book that has your model from Huntsman is the model for a book I've written, and it's like two-timing sneaky bugger.
That's right. He's two-timing. Well, and that happens a lot, unless you get into the stratosphere where you're doing super original cover art and hiring your own models, which a very small percentage of authors do. We end up going, oh, hi, there you are. You snuck over to that series.
I always wonder what they would make of it. I have a friend who's a model, and her stock photos got used so often in erotic short stories, and she'd be like, "Oh, okay, I'm a futanari today," and then it's like, "Oh, I'm a babysitter," and it was just quite bizarre to see her picture attached to all of these different stories.
That would be true, yeah.
Right, well, I shall wrap this up, but it has been such a pleasure speaking to you. Now, tell me, what is coming out soon? I know Gruff I'm really excited about, which is your shifter romance with goats. It is the goat of the goat shifter romances.
That's right. It's goat shifters in love. And that, of course, ties into the Fox Hollow series, which is the shifter series. That should be coming out in early August. Then Legacy is the Next Deadly Curiosities book, and that is with the editor right now. So again, I'm also hoping for an August release. Blink is the next Treasure Trail series that's set in Cape May, New Jersey, and that is a guy who used to chase art fraud, used to be an art fraud inspector, and with a burned out ex-Newark cop. And all of there's a lot of ghosts and witches and mafia connections in that, because their history won't leave them alone.
Georgie represent.
Yep. Cape May. Well, Newark's right there, and you got the Russian mob and all that sort of stuff. So, and again, hoping that will be out in the next month or so. And those are the three big things right now. And then, there'll be more after that. But it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh no, it's been a real pleasure, and I hope people enjoy watching this and listening to you as much as I've enjoyed chatting to you about this, because it's great to sort of just talk about the process of it rather than all the behind the scenes. But anyway, I'm going to stop recording this now, but thank you so much. And if anyone is interested in learning more about Gail, there's going to be links down in the description of the video. Right, cheerio.